Thanks, Shadi. So I am legally blind, so if you have a question or anything, you literally just have to shout it out, and that's fine. I won't be embarrassed, and you shouldn't be embarrassed either. Is everyone enjoying their time at ChefConf? Yeah, right? Man, how about that A2? It seemed like some cool stuff. So I'm hosting this talk for a couple of reasons. One is that the world that we live in, that our industry is in, is fundamentally changing, right? Like 8 years ago or 13 years ago or whenever, when you look back, like when I first got started with this industry, we were totally about heroes, right? The person who comes in, saves the day, brings that down production server back up and getting everything going. But that's not the world that we live in anymore. The number one reason that millennials choose their workplace is because of collaboration and teamwork. We have moved from heroes to teams, and like you look at Marvel superheroes, right? We went from like Iron Man to the Black Panthers, a giant team of people versus one person. And I think that part of what will transition your organization to be more effective at teamwork, be more effective at the DevOps, is to really embrace this culture of vulnerability that I'm going to speak to you about. Before we get into that, though, I'm kind of interested in the room and who's here. Is anyone here a software engineer? Oh, you can't raise your hands yet? Okay, cool. How about any managers? I've never heard anyone say, yeah, to being a manager. So, okay, so we got some managers. We have some software engineers. Any SAs here? Oh, I'm really surprised by that. Okay, so I have been all of these things. Right now I'm a cloud architect at Relativity, but I've been a lot of things through my career. And to introduce myself a little bit more, I was born in Bombay, India, and, growing up, my parents were like, hey, we really want to move to some place that's kind of hot, like India, maybe some place where people don't really speak English that well. So we came to Alabama, and from there, I went on to study at Boston University, get a degree in biomedical engineering, and then I worked at a couple of places. I did research on high-field MRI at Harvard Medical School, worked on Wall Street for 10 years before coming to Chicago and working at Relativity. And I remember on the first day of my research position at Harvard Medical School, an MD PhD was asking me to hand him a tube to resuscitate a mouse that had been left in the MRI for too long. And, I gave him a tube, and he's like, what am I going to do with this? And I was like, I don't know, like resuscitate the mouse. And he's like, no, I need a wider one. So I gave him a wider one. He's like, Samir, you have a degree in biomedical engineering. Do you not know how the resistance of a tube varies with diameter? Pop quiz. Anyone know? Yeah, I didn't know either. It's like by the third power. And to be honest, I actually tried looking it up ahead of this just to make sure. And like the first article was an hour-long presentation from Khan Academy on this. So I'm not the only person who doesn't know this. But at the time, this guy really made me feel like, oh, man, I should have known that. And something similar happened when I went to work on Wall Street. I met people who were extremely talented, very, very, very talented. They could do JVM tuning like you can't imagine, right? Like all kinds of stuff, way beyond just concurrent mark sweep, all kinds of stuff. And I remember being quizzed by one of them like, hey, man, you aren't handling your objects well. How do you not know that, if you put something as destroyed, it doesn't actually get destroyed right away? It's just in the Eden generation. Like, duh, come on. And, after hearing this again and again and again and again throughout my career, I started to develop a pattern of thinking that I think many of you may also have or have experienced at one time. And that's, wow, I really should have known that. I can't believe I didn't know that fact. And then a little bit underlying that is like, oh, man, I really, really should have known that. Like, I guess I'm not all that great. All right, anyone ever had this kind of thought? Like, yeah, right? Like, all of us have. And throughout my career, I started to develop an innate sense that, well, okay, there was my life before work. In school, we're very cooperative with each other. We really helped each other out. In my family, that's what we're going to do. My friends, that's what we're going to do. But as soon as I step through that door, we're entering a new world with a new set of rules. And I to distill these rules, there's a book called 47 Laws of Power. It is fantastically evil. And it's kind of entertaining, but it's pretty evil. To distill these rules, I'll put them down like this. There are basically some rules of fear that I kind of learned throughout my career, and I'm being very honest here, very much a practitioner of these at one point. Basically, the first one is to exploit ignorance. If someone says they don't know something about it, like, man, you take that from them and you use it against them, right? You can use that to acquire their group. Hey, your group doesn't know anything about JVM tuning. Well, I do. Maybe we should be in charge of your group, right? Take them over. And something else that, really goes with these rules of fear is to always deflect blame. So I don't know who proofread my slides, but whoever did, they're going to get it as soon as I get back to the office, right? And the other thing is to always sorry. Thank you. Defend everything. Everything that you own is yours. Work is a zero-sum game. If you lose something, I gain something. If I lose something, you've gained something. So every little bit of territory that you've got, every code that you own, every server that you manage, that is your property, and you had better guard it with your life because that's your career on the line. And I know this sounds really bad, right? So with all of these rules, it actually leads to something. Can anyone guess what it leads to? Things that don't work, bad culture. I heard a lot of things. No, but actually, it actually doesn't lead to that necessarily. It actually leads to great success, right? And I hate to admit it, but we do have to be mindful of this. Companies where this kind of culture is persuasive tend to be very successful. They tend to be very old. They tend to produce a good amount of wealth for their customers, maybe even produce output that is very useful to us. Maybe they produce, jet engines that you fly on. Maybe they end up producing the television programs that we watch. There could be all kinds of things that these companies produce that actually is surprisingly good. And for me, I became initiated, and this is what we do. We provide a lot of wealth to our shareholders. We are bringing good to the world with our financial services, and we actually are helping a lot of people. For me personally, this also meant great success. I went from being a software engineer, no experience in software. I was resuscitating mice, went to work on Wall Street. Led to a lot of success. Personally, professionally, I went from being a software engineer to being a manager, to being a VP, being the canon for my manager, my director. If we wanted to get a new department, I'd go in with my document of how we build secure web servers and say, here's how you do it. I think you might not be doing it correctly. It was the canon. Go in there, take their department, and use that to really make our organization in general better and to allow us to provide better value and better services. And everything was really, 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 really going pretty well for me. And then suddenly I had to have eye surgery. And the surgery went fine, but the follow-up care didn't. And I ended up being blind in a weekend. But it's okay. It happened, and whatever. Life goes on. So in 6 weeks, I started going back to work, and I was ready. Right? All right, going back to work. Let's dust off the old 47 laws of power and get ready. Right? It's okay, let's go take over an organization. But what I found was that this is what I was. I wasn't a canon anymore. I was this gun, right? I was really, really ineffective with these laws anymore. I just couldn't do them. And part of the reason that happened is the small problems that I would have, the small things that you probably encounter every day, would turn into giant boulders. So I was doing some research for this, and I found this article. So I was reading this article, and it really kind of illustrated one of the problems that I would have. So I was reading this article. I'm like, yeah, it's pretty interesting. Looks relevant to me. But boom, this happened. So I see a magnified portion of the screen. So like what you're seeing right here is kind of like the quarter of the screen that I would see using my magnifier, right? And I'm like, it's like something has popped up. And for me personally, this appears to be the equivalent of someone coming up to you when you're working, you're doing some coding, and someone just like plunking their monitor right in front of yours, right? And you're like, what is this? And it takes you out of the context. You have to figure out like, how do I get rid of this? You can't really look around it because it's right there. So what I would do is I'd scroll up to the top left. It's a close button there. No. All right. Scroll to the top right. Close button there. No. All right. So I'm getting really sick of this. Hit escape a couple of times. No, that doesn't work. Scroll to the bottom right, and okay, that's where the close button is. But now that, 1 or 2 second process that would normally take me started to take me a lot longer. Like it would take me like 5 or 10 seconds just to close this little modal. And this is what the thing looked like. In general, you can see the modal, the ad there for something. The document that I wrote on how to build secure web servers, like, oh man, what a great document, except it had a lot of screenshots in it. So now I can't even read the document, right? We have this great document on how to build a secure web server, but I can't answer for it. When someone's like, hey, do you remember to, clear headers? Like, I don't know, maybe. Go look at the picture and tell me if we do. It doesn't really work well, and it wasn't really working well. And so my professional life was starting to not look very bright anymore. But I did just have a kid. She was, about 2 or 3 months old. And do you guys know what this is? Come on. What is it? It's a diaper. Okay. Do you know that a diaper has a front and a back? So I didn't know that. And, my wife and I, we weren't really arguing, but this would be a constant source of frustration for her. She'd be like, hey, you put the diaper on backwards again. And I'd be like, oh, I don't know, maybe I was tired or, something like that happened. I don't know. It was the middle of the night, right? Maybe I didn't put it on backwards. And one day, this really, really got to us. It was a bad day at work. I came home. The baby had an accident in an hour. And she was like, hey, you put the diaper on backwards again. And I don't know why, but for some reason, maybe because I was tired, I was like, I don't know what you're talking about. What do you mean backwards? What is backwards for a diaper? It's definitely like the padded side is facing her. I don't understand what you mean. Right? And she was like, do you not know that the diaper has a front and a back? And I was like, no, I don't know. And then so we did a very romance comedy style thing of like put the diaper on a stuffed animal multiple times until we figured out that, the position of the tabs, that's how you can use to figure out if the diaper is backwards or forwards. And it's so weird because like this weirdly personal moment of figuring out this what should have been common knowledge about a diaper led to me going to work and talking to a friend and talking about this experience, and I was like, yeah, I don't know, everyone probably knows this, but I didn't know this. And my friend George asked me like, hey, do you know why we remove headers on IIS web servers? And I was like, oh yeah, we totally do that because we don't want to reveal that we're using IIS. And he's like, oh, I had no idea about that. And I was like, what else do you not know about on our big document? Maybe I can tell you. And so we had this like pretty in-depth conversation about web servers. And, towards the end of it, he was like, oh, I'm glad that you brought up the diaper thing because there is no way I would have asked you about this. And we got to talking, and we realized, you know what? This culture of, like, why do we do this can quickly turn into, like, can you explain to me why we do something like this? And so, we're all here at ChefConf, and one of the things that you may have guessed is, well, one of the first things that we thought of was, like, maybe we could translate some of our document into a script so that I can actually read it, right? Because while I can't read the screenshot, like I have no problem at all reading the chef recipe. Like, a screen reader can totally read that. It's just plain text, super easy, super accessible. I can invert colors all day, do whatever I need to do. So we started to do that, and I was telling my manager like, oh, this is great. One of these days I'm going to get back into the mode where we can use this, and we'll really, really be making a difference. What ended up happening though was our servers were built very consistently. We had a config management system that really started to get built out. And people would come to us because George is a friendly guy, and they would say like, "Hey, can you tell us about like that thing that you're doing? It seems to be working really well." We'd be like, "Sure, we can tell you." And they would, one of the first things that they would do is immediately jump to like, "Oh, hey, you forgot about this setting," pulling out the old rules like, "I'm going to take your department over." And we'd be like, "Yeah, okay, sure, yeah, we can totally tell you about them. Here's why we're not doing that," or, "Oh man, that is a good idea. We should totally do that. Can you help us write that code?" And it would like throw everyone off, right? They're like, "Wait, you want me to help you?" Like, yeah, you can write it, you can own it. We'll take the blame if it doesn't go well, but you can take the credit if it goes well. And like people really, really, really bought into this, right? And it started to transform our organization into something fundamentally different. It started to transform our organization so that we had this little bubble that within this larger organization kind of seemed like home or like a family thing, right? Like you could admit you didn't know something and that was okay. People would actually help you. People would be more responsible for their own thing. You had the code out there. Everyone could look at it, see what was wrong with it. And if there was a problem, they'd go and fix it for you. Or they'd go and report it to you and tell you to fix it. And this started kind of a big revolution. And to sum up like what we found out after a few iterations, actually 2 years of this kind of culture and operating in this, was we started to find out that there are rules for operating in this culture too, and they lead to great success. And there are a couple of rules for it, and there are one: if you just listen, right, it starts to make a big difference. And if you admit ignorance, even when you aren't actually ignorant about something, it'll make a huge difference. At my current job, one of the interns was like, "Hey, do you actually know what happens during a chef client run?" And I was like, "Man, come on, intern. Don't tell me what happens during a chef client run. I think I know what happened." But I didn't say that. But I was like, "No, what happens?" And so he's explaining to me, and he's like, so we actually compile everything first locally, and I bet that's causing like a CPU spike. And I bet that if we look at our servers, we're going to see like a CPU spike every time there's a chef client run, and that could be diagnostic. It could also be a problem if we're running like a heavy job. And I was like, "Oh yeah, that's actually true, and that's a really good point that I hadn't considered." But the only way to really get that kind of information is to literally say like, "I don't know, explain things to me," and you end up learning a lot that you thought you knew. We all make assumptions, and we shouldn't be making them at work. One of the biggest changes that we had on the street and in my new place is welcoming change. Back with the laws of fear, one of the things they would always worry about is like any kind of change. Any change meant a imbalance in the delicate balance of that zero-sum game. You might lose something with any change, right? So any change, you got to be really fearful of it. Welcoming that change and saying, "Oh, you don't want to use Chef, you want to try to use Ansible." Like, all right, let's try it out. Who knows? Maybe it'll be better, right? And you try it out, and you see like, well, it actually wasn't. Or you try out some other tech, and you see if that actually was better. Welcoming that change makes you seem, and it makes you likely become more welcome, more vulnerable, and makes people think of you as more approachable. And that is phenomenally helpful when you're trying to drive a cross-cutting cultural change within your organization. When you're developers, think of you as someone who you can easily approach and request help from. They will do that. If you're a developer and your sysadmins can come to you and say, "Hey, we want to deploy this new DLL and we don't know how to do it. Can you show us a good way to do it? Can you help us develop one?" They will do that if you welcome change and if you're really open to that kind of thing. Most of all, like this is kind of a fundamental change for how work operates, at least in my mind. Right? We went from one set of rules where we don't admit anything to another set where we're literally putting ourselves out there all the time to say, "Oops, I messed up on that," or "Oops, I don't know about that." Even sometimes when you do. And that ultimately does lead to like a lot of good success. It leads to a lot of good things happening for your organization. And the best part about this is that you don't just have to take my word for it, like reading Rainbow style, right? Don't take my word for it. You can visit your local internet and find all kinds of articles about how this is working everywhere. On the stage today, Kimberly talked about Microsoft and the change they've made. Wow, what a phenomenal change. Like, one of the most vulnerable things you can do is put your stuff on GitHub and make it open source, right? Because you're really putting yourself out there. And Microsoft did this with like .NET, like their core tech. Put it out there. I remember when it happened, that it was actually at Microsoft Connect when they announced they were doing it. And like that day, they got 97 pull requests to fix defects, one of which like affected us. So making them vulnerable actually turns out to help them a lot, because a lot more people want to get involved and want to help. Like, I don't think there's anyone at this conference who is actually thinking, I really want to hurt someone here, right? Everyone is kind of helpful. Everyone wants to help out. But we sometimes have built work cultures where we don't do that, even though we have this personal culture where we want to help people and where that's something that we prioritize. Google, there's an interesting article on Google that's called All the Assholes Have Left. And it's about this exact thing. Like, it's about how making the simplest changes to be more vulnerable and to allow managers to accept vulnerability from their engineers, or allow engineers to be vulnerable to their managers and say, like, oh, sorry, I don't know how to do that. You need to help me out. We need to get training on this. We need to talk to the other group and say, like, hey, we don't know what you're talking about. Help us adopt your new tech. It made a big difference in people's happiness, et cetera. Some other industries that have done this, Shell Oil, when they had an oil platform on the middle of the seas, like really, really dangerous job, they found one of the easiest ways to increase safety was just to have a meeting towards the end of every day and have the workers talk about what they're feeling, right? And I don't know about you, but like the first time I heard that, I was like, what? I can't imagine a bunch of, like really, really strong, buff guys coming together and saying like, oh, I feel sad. I don't. We're pulling oil out, and I don't know what it does, and I don't know. I feel sad. But it turns out that by having that, by being open, by being vulnerable, people were willing to share some stuff that was actually really, really critical for their work, like saying, "Hey, I am really too sick. I'm feeling lightheaded. I'm feeling dizzy. I can't go operate that heavy drill." And you know what happens? Coworkers are like, "Oh, I've totally been there. Let me step in, take your shift for you." And then that prevents a major workplace accident that could have serious ramifications, right? We work in software. There might be serious ramifications, but if I accept a pull request that I shouldn't, like, no one's going to die. In this environment, people would die, and this change to a more vulnerable culture made a huge, huge difference. And if you're interested in vulnerability in general, there's like a Brene Brown TED Talk that is fantastic. And I would totally watch it. If you got a flight, like, go download it and watch it on your flight. The good news about this is that you can actually make substantial changes to your culture regardless of how invulnerable it may seem today. And, the theme of ChefConf is do change. If you want to break the current culture that you have at your work, that doesn't really make sense because it doesn't exist anywhere outside of the doors to your office. If you want to make it so that you go into your office, and it's exactly the same as the world outside, there's simple things you can do. One of the easiest things you can do is you can do what I did and just go talk to a trusted colleague at work and talk about something that you don't really feel comfortable talking to your manager about. Like, hey, maybe I don't know how to use this. Maybe that new piece of tech that we're introducing, our developers aren't getting it, and we need to work with them. Anything like that, right? Or you can even say like, oh, man, that one project I really, really messed up on. Doing that kind of thing really helps. One of the other things you could do is just lead by example, and during your scrum, say, I need help. Or just in general, say, I need help on something. I don't know how to do it. Quick question for you guys. How many people here think they're doing pretty well at their job, but not as well as they could, and they know they could do better? All right. So I got good news for you. Like, it's everyone, right? I don't think there are many people who are like, I am a rock star. I am the savior of the universe. I am awesome. Everyone has in the back of their mind something that they're very, very vulnerable about. And being able to expose that vulnerability with others to get help to make yourself better at that. It might seem hard at first, but when you're able to do it, it is substantially powerful for your career and for your organization. Like, what kind of organization do you want to be in? One that says, I don't know how to use Chef, I'm just going to like fight against it for years and years and years and years. Or one that says, I don't know how to use Chef, can you like show me how to do it? Or can you show me what the intricacies of a CCR are? Like that's substantially different, right? Personally, I still don't know how to use Chef Shell. I have no idea how to use it. It looks really cool, looks pretty useful, but I've never really gotten into it, and I wish someone would show me, but I haven't been brave enough to ask. So now I figured, like, oh, why not ask in a completely public setting, right? That'll make the difference. Some of the other things you could do are just, in general, think about how you behave outside of your office and try to behave the same way inside. I know that we talk about Chef, we talk about technology, and we talk about, oh man, we could really change the world if we could just make this one business thing easier. But one thing that we can actually change the world on, one thing that everyone in this room, everyone period has control over, is how your organization operates. Making your organization more friendly is the first and easiest way to put you on the path to adopting DevOps. And the person who can actually make that happen happens to be sitting here in this room, and it's you. And you were the Time Person of the Year, too. So make it happen. Embrace that vulnerability. Get it out there and make a change in your organization that you can really, really, really be proud of. You don't have to go blind to do it. Trust me. There's a lot of people at my organization who do this every day. If you are in an organization, you should do it too. Thanks. Okay, so the question was, what happens when you try to be more vulnerable and you get blank stares or you get pushback? One of the suggestions was, do you just keep trying? You could absolutely keep trying. You could try with a more trusted person or in a smaller group setting. Like sometimes people feel uncomfortable being as embracive of something new as the person who's asking the question is. And they don't want to do that in a group setting. Asking them one-on-one will make a big, big difference. And that's what I would do, is ask someone one-on-one, ask someone outside, or if it's a chef question, there's like this big chef community Slack. And I found that to be very helpful too. You can always ask outside. And then tell others of your success by just asking the question, like, I didn't know how to do this, so I asked the chef community Slack, and this dude named Irving totally told me how to do it. Okay, so the question was, what do you do when someone is trying to be vulnerable and they give you an idea that's bad, and you don't want to really spend a lot of time and research into that idea? How do you both? I think the question under is like, how do you both be vulnerable but be accepting of ideas that are may not be the best thought out?
Yeah. You're trying to be vulnerable, but somebody comes to you with an idea that you know is just awful.
Right. So what do you do when someone comes to you with an idea that is just terrible, and you're like, oh man, I do not want to deal with this? So this does happen often, right? And one of the things that happens with like experience is you get a good idea of patterns and anti-patterns and things that may actually be a bad idea that won't work. One of the things that I found that's pretty helpful is just asking questions and having the person truly talk you through it, not doing this in a way where you have an agenda where you're like, I'm going to make them trip up on their logic, but actually making them work through the explanation and seeing if they come across the same mistake as you're trying to protect against. In all honesty, like sometimes I've totally had a bad idea presented to me, and after talking with the person through it, I'm like, oh, actually my assumption of why that was a bad idea was based on something that isn't real or something that's changed, and I should totally embrace it. It does take effort, and it does take a little bit of time. One of the things I really like to do is I like to take the person out to lunch or go out to a bar and like, hey, let's talk about it then. And then, you're on more friendly terms. You don't feel so bad about wasting time then because, hey, you're at a bar. You just spend more time there. Okay, so the question was when you're asking team members about their weakness and you get silence, but you know they actually do have weakness, how do you help them get trained up on it? It depends on your role. If you're a manager or a leader, someone who's going to write someone's performance evaluation, you have a degree of power over that person that you may not even sense. Even when you're trying to ask that person for something out of good, constructive, I want to help you, they may take it as, oh, I got to be careful what I say here because I'm stepping into a poor review if I admit that I don't know this or that I screwed up this project because I don't know how attribute, the attribute dependency chain works. And in that case, what I would do is have a trusted colleague ask them if they are having problems with this, or even have the trusted colleague suggest training to them. If you are their peer, however, and they're having problems with this, then I think at some level you actually owe it to the person to say and to say what the problem is that you think they have. And now it's on you to have a very, very uncomfortable conversation, maybe even start it out by saying, I feel really bad about telling you this, but I need to know how I can help you with X, Y, and Z because it's not working well. I don't know. You could always say like you're a really good person, but yeah, right. Yeah. Okay, fantastic question. The question was if you're trying to influence change above you and your management structure doesn't want to really accept or listen to that advice that you're giving, how do you influence them while still being vulnerable? And I think this is like one of the biggest challenges everywhere. I know at one of my old jobs, like one of the things we did was like, all right, I hear you don't want to do this one thing that we really, really want to do. So we are going to work on what you want to during most of our time, and then we're also going to work on this other thing that we think will actually make a bigger difference. And we're going to collect metrics on both, and then we're going to present them to you to make a logical decision. And in that case, luckily, our manager was willing to accept the science and say, the numbers prove me wrong, let's go with it. And he had a case for his manager by saying, well, we actually did an A/B test, and here are the results. And, I will have to say, he didn't really say, I didn't want them to do this, but that's okay. The change that you want is for people to accept change, not necessarily to get the credit of, we made the decision, that was the right one, right? Okay, cool.